Good evening, everyone, and welcome in and welcome back. I am so stoked that we are back for season 2 of Talks with Thee. And episode 1, we have a hot topic for you guys tonight. And so we are streaming live with the HBCU Lounge Network. And the topic tonight is mommy and daddy issues. So we know that this topic is kind of can be a touchy topic and sometimes a topic that people just steer clear of altogether, but this season is all about women's healing. And so with that being said, we have to dive in and talk about those tough conversations and have at it. So we have our guests with us this evening, and I would like to go ahead and introduce them. They are no strangers to the show. They've been with us before. And so without further ado, we have Dr. Dyona. and, and our other therapist with us tonight is James Perkins. Welcome back, you two. So glad.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. Well, I would like for you guys to go ahead and introduce yourself for our viewers who haven't seen you guys before and don't know what it is that you do, and just share how many years you've been doing what you do.
Okay. Did you want
ladies first? I'll let the ladies go first. Be polite.
All right. My name is Dr. Dyona, and I'm actually a psychologist working in South Florida. I have a practice called Augustin and Augustin Psychology with my sister, Dr. Joe, who's also a psychologist. And we basically created our practice a couple of years ago just because we saw that there was a need for mental health services in our community. And we wanted to do what we could to ensure that we provided culturally competent care to people who needed it, no matter what race, ethnic background, or whatever it is. So I'm so glad that I get a chance to be a part of this discussion. I think it's a very important, meaningful one. And I hope that, everyone who is watching will get something from this.
Yes.
Awesome. My name is James Perkins. I own and operate a private practice here in North Carolina. I'm a native of North Carolina, but recently moved back about 4 years ago to start my practice here. Work significantly with brothers of color who look like me and share my experience. So good about 80% of my practice is with African American men, and the other demographic is couples. Like that, Dyona, I think the need is so great in our community, and there are not a lot of clinicians that our community can easily find to connect to, and so I'm glad that that we have therapists that look like us, that share our experience, that can really help people navigate the healing journey. So I often say I don't know if I could put a number of years that I've been doing this, because I like to think of me just always walking in my calling, wherever that is, either professionally. Before I was even it gave me a license, I was still doing it because I think I'm just called to it. So thank you again for the invitation. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Welcome. And I believe that too. I think that, there's some people who do, career and it's not their purpose. They're just kind of in it. But I would like to think that a lot of the therapists, have a passion for it, and they've always been, giving some type of therapy or words of wisdom, throughout their life as their calling. And so we're glad that you all listen. So, well, welcome in. So I wanted to go into this topic. Well, I research, obviously I always try and do a little research before the show because I am not a therapist or an expert in the field. I like to just, research and learn something new so I can, have something to offer. But I had no clue how much in all the different ways that we are impacted, by, our parents. Obviously, they're the first introduction, to life and to people, and so they're going to impact it, of course, because they're the ones who are teaching us. But just all the little nuances, I was like, wow, like I never thought about, some of these things. But wanted to go into what I found on Madame Noir. And so it says so often women have been given that title of daddy issues. According to Madame Noir, it's a phrase that can make a lot of women's blood boil. And I've heard that so many times when people reference to you, oh, she just has daddy issues. It's, a lot of women don't like it. And a lot of times it triggers them. And, I can see, why. It says that the phrase, I'm sorry, at some point, many of us, like I said, have been told, okay, maybe you have daddy issues if you do, or even if you don't. um, and the term, it becomes weaponized, which is unfortunate because in so many cases, we're missing out on learning the value of, okay, maybe you have daddy issues. We're not going to just chuck it off as just that. We're going to find out what's that all about. Like, why do you have, these daddy issues? And just missing out on that importance of it. It's kind of like, swept under the rug. And so that, kind of sucks. It's just understanding exactly how and why that is. It often, feels like some of us, who get accused of having daddy issues, they aren't leaving room for a person to explore those said issues, grow and or improve. Instead, it sounds like a permanent conviction, and that is so very true. And then I think a lot of people shut down once you're labeled because it's just kind of like, okay, well, there's nothing else to it. You got the issues, right? And so first and foremost, we want to remove that stigma because every person in the world both have mommy and daddy issues. It's not just young ladies or young men, or vice versa with the other parent, who's contributing to, I guess, those said issues. Our parents determine our emotional well-being tremendously, and that even goes for the parents who weren't present in our lives. And this will deeply impact that person. And so I just wanted to start off with that because it's so true. And I would love for us to kind of debunk that theory. So I wanted to open up with the first question for you all. And that is, do you believe that everyone has mommy and daddy issues? And if that's the case, why is it so one-sided towards women, like, okay, or just the daddy issues, not, oh, you have mommy issues. We don't talk about that. So James, if you could elaborate.
Yes. I'll say this, probably me and Dr. Dyona, probably not probably, I'm pretty 100% sure that we could probably do a master class to answer that, but I know we have to be concise on tonight, right? And, my simple answer is yes, I think we all have them. And the simple explanation I use is that I don't think any of us leaves our family of origin unscathed. For the very simple fact that you have two imperfect beings raising a human child. There's no reasonable expectation for us to have of these two imperfect beings, right? Raising a child that does not come up with some wounding as a result of how we related to them. I think the issue becomes, right, for most is when we allow those wounds to actually define our experience. And so it's not necessarily the wound from our parents that we incur that determines really the trajectory of our life. It's really how we respond to it. And so when you think about that, I'll just speak from my experience, come from a loving home, have great parents, but there's still parts of my relationship dynamics with my parents that are still evolving, right? And so, as I like to say, I think we're all of our families are on spectrum from dysfunction. Some of us may be on the outside, some of us may be on the extreme side, but we're all on that spectrum.
Absolutely, that's so true. Absolutely. I know a good friend of mine. She wrote a book, and it was, I think it's called Two Faces. And basically she was just explaining like her experience. Like she came from, same thing you said, great family, great, parents, great relationship with her dad, great relationship with her mom, loving, community, great relationship with her sisters and or her siblings all together. And she said that she still, there were still things, there were still issues. There were still, battling with making sure her mental health was together, and so, we're affected by it. So I wanted to go ahead and offer you the time to expand as well, Dr. Dyona.
I mean, I definitely think James's comment about how we don't leave our family of origin unscathed, that was like a mic drop moment, because I think sometimes people who come from, let's say, abusive families, they look at other families and think they're perfect. But the reality is every family is dysfunctional in different ways. So going back to what James said, it is a spectrum. And I think when it comes to mommy and daddy issues, a lot of times we don't hear about mommy issues. It's strictly daddy issues. It's normally aimed at women who either are promiscuous or they're clingy and needy or they're emotionally detached, and that label is thrown at them. But a lot of times we miss the fact that you can have mommy and daddy issues, and it doesn't necessarily mean that your relationship with your parent was
There you
bad per
go.
se. It
Right.
could even be a relationship where the parent was too, they doted on you, or they were overprotective, or they were overly permissive. All
Right.
of those things can lead to mommy and daddy issues. So I definitely think Madame Noir is onto something where I would say everyone has mommy, daddy issues, or a combination of both.
No, that's so true. And you made such a great point about that, because we don't think about that because we're thinking, oh, it's only got to be negative. But I mean, in a way, I guess it can be kind of negative because it may be crippling you. Let's just say if you were just spoiled rotten, it's kind of hindering you, in certain areas. And then there's a different expectation, and you still have that expectation for you to be this great, grow up to be this great individual. But because the way that you were raised and coddled too much, or someone doing things for you all the time or coming to your rescue, my pastors, my first lady, she had mentioned that. She said, it's crazy out here. She's like, you have parents who are just over the top with their kids, that they grow up and they're calling their bosses, the children's boss, and intervening. It's like, you can't do that. Like the boss is like, this is a grown person. Like, what is happening right now?
That's true. And I actually remember when I was in college as a freshman, one of the professors started off the class by saying, you guys are adults. So if your parent tries to call me about your grade or your performance, I'm not picking up. And I was like, there are parents who would do that,
Wow.
but it's a thing. Yeah.
I
I
believe
used to have
that.
a friend that I grew up with, and her mom was like that. And I used to I didn't know what to think of it because I didn't grow up that way. Like my mom, she would go to bat. If someone was messing with us, it's gonna be a problem. But she wasn't like, coming up to my job, or, or really like, just correcting my teacher if, like I'm acting up. It's just like, she's gonna hear my side, and she's just like, okay, I'm gonna trust you. But if I find out it was you acting a fool, it's gonna be a problem. So, that was the kind of relationship. I never thought like, okay, I'm gonna go into adulthood. My mom's gonna be fighting my, my battles, or my parents are just gonna be coming here fighting my battles. Like, you grown, baby, so. But yes, James, did you have something to say? I felt like you were.
No, look, I was texting, but making sure my volume was correct. But I think it's like interesting is most of what I hear, like the observation that a girl has daddy issues is usually almost very specifically around the areas from men around respect. It's hardly, and when I say like hardly ever, I never hear, but in this, some of our brothers who are listening, please don't out me. Like, man, I love y'all, but I got to just keep it 100. That is usually around these areas with respect or rules for what respect is for a man.
Mm.
Um, you generally never hear a man saying, you got daddy issues because of anything else outside of tone, how how you address them. Other than that, the
Mm.
other issues that are really important, they don't make a big comment out of them. But specifically around these areas of respect, I think are, at least for men that I sit with and share, or their concerns around when they very loosely throw that concern of a woman having daddy issues. But that was
Mm.
my additive comment.
Yeah, no, that's actually important, because I think we hear it a certain way, or just when you kind of like overhear, and it's just like, just because she got on a tight dress don't mean she's got daddy issues. Like she might work hard for that body, and she's like,
Right.
listen, it's gonna
She
get
gonna
shown
show it
off.
off
I feel
out
it.
of
Let
these
me let,
streets.
let me get completely snatched. Y'all gonna be like, okay,
Right.
me.
So this
I
is
know
not
me.
this is a
Y'all super
natural BBL.
conservative. Now she got on the freakum dress. Like, wait a minute.
Right. So I didn't
Well,
purchase any of this. It's all mine. Yeah.
right, absolutely. Like, it's gonna be flaunted. So,
And
so
I do
so,
want to point out too, one thing I wanted to add.
mhm,
Part of removing the stigma is recognizing if a person does have mommy or daddy issues, it's not something to use as an insult.
right.
That
Mm-hmm.
means that, going back to what James said earlier, there is a wound from childhood that is
Mm-hmm.
still affecting their relationships in adulthood. So part
Yep.
of removing the stigma is recognizing, you know what, just like you're saying, they may have mommy and daddy
Mm-hmm.
issues. You may have mommy and daddy issues too.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Don't see it as something to use
Right.
to look down at a person because they don't act, think, or dress the way that you do, but acknowledge,
Mm-hmm.
this is something that can affect my adult relationships. I need to work it out so that I can have
Mhm.
a different
Yeah.
experience.
Absolutely,
Absolutely.
because then it's kind of something that you have to look at as a young lady. If you are working through those issues and someone is points notices something before you do, because sometimes folks will, um, and then they weaponize it, that you're not in a safe space, and that
Mm-hmm.
person is probably doesn't care about you, as you may think that
Yeah.
they do, because they're weaponizing it. It should come from a place of like, hey, like, let's address something is going on, let's address
Mm-hmm.
it. So so next I wanted to go into, since this is thrown around usually with women, as far as the daddy issues comment, but mommy issues is a thing as well. What are some of those signs of a woman having mommy issues? um James looks like he is thinking. So, Dr. Diana, I'm
Okay.
gonna let you take it
Oh,
first.
I thought Diana was gonna take that one. I thought she was gonna give
Oh,
that one to
okay.
her.
Well, yeah,
I
I
wanted to
can
hear her
definitely
insight too. I
start.
was like, I want to hear what
I'll
South Florida
start and
has
then
to
I'll
say.
throw the baton to James. But when
Sounds
it
good.
comes to mommy issues in women,
Mhm.
one of the more, okay, so first of all, let's just kind of talk about what it means to have mommy issues or even
Yes,
daddy issues.
yes.
Generally
Yes.
speaking, what we're talking about is your attachment to your mom in childhood.
Mhm.
Something went wrong somewhere along the way. Maybe
Mm.
they were abusive physically, psychologically, sexually, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Maybe they were neglectful. Maybe they abandoned you. Maybe
Mm.
they were physically present but emotionally absent. Maybe they
Mhm.
were overly permissive. They wanted to be your best friend instead of your mom.
Mm.
All of those
Mm-hmm.
types of things can lead to mommy issues, which basically means you don't have a strong attachment to your mom. So,
Mm-hmm.
how that shows up in adulthood is a lot of times those needs that you expected to be met in your mother, you look for them in other people. So,
Mm.
Yes.
nurturing,
Mhm. Yeah.
care. A woman with mommy issues may be overly clingy, overly needy, constantly looking for reassurance that they are loved,
Mhm.
that they
Mm-hmm.
are valued, that their partner isn't going to leave them. Additionally, women with mommy
Mm-hmm.
issues a lot of times will not have a lot of female friends because,
Mhm.
going back to their childhood, the blueprint for how you connect with other people is oftentimes your family of origin. So
Right.
if you don't connect to the main woman in your life who is supposed to love you, care for you, and look out for you, it can make it difficult for you to connect with other women as you're older.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you'll see a woman who says, I don't get along with females. I don't have female friends. Most of my friends are guy friends.
Mm,
Chances are she may have a mommy issue. Same thing goes for, let's say, a woman who was raised by a mom who was overly critical,
mm,
super protective, helicopter parent. That child grows up feeling very smothered and suffocated by mom. They
Right.
may then have mommy issues that shows up as emotional detachment. Or if they got
mm,
used to mom doing everything for them, then they become overly dependent in their relationships. So
Mm-hmm.
mm,
mommy issues can show up in a multitude of ways in women.
okay.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. That man, she was on point, and I think you did a great job in articulating that spectrum that
Mm,
people can be on as it relates to mommy issues. I think it's right. The goal um, of those, individuals, obviously, who invest in therapy and find support
mm,
to move towards the middle, because, like you said, you can be on the extreme of both of those sides. I think
right.
most women
Right.
will find themselves, depending on what their experience has been like with their mother, on one of those sides, the
True.
side where they don't have a lot of female friends. Most of their friends are guys, or they're on the other side where I think you articulated that they feel smothered. So it's hard for them to make decisions. They need that reassurance.
Mhm.
And it look, as you were talking, I was just thinking, going through my clientele, like as she was talking, I was like, yep, I can see my clients just popping up in my head along that spectrum,
Mhm. Mhm.
because of exactly what you just said. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it's so interesting. And most of the things that you had mentioned were what I was looking up about the low self-esteem, difficulty trusting others, having few female friends. That was one of those. That one I knew because I know some people who had bad relationships with their mothers, and that was one of the common things is that they struggle, to have
Mhm.
female
Mhm.
friends. And to me, I kind of befriend everybody. It's almost like they felt like they don't deserve it, in a
Mhm.
sense. And
Yeah,
and I felt that way in other, areas. And so
yeah.
it's so interesting, like how it shows up, differently
Hmm.
in
Mhm.
different folks. And what's the other one? Oh, and avoiding anything having to do with your mother. And I feel like I really see that on TV more so when it's like,
Yeah.
movie and they're like, my mom's coming to town and all she does is just pick at everything. And
Right.
oh, I need a Papa's that, I got to do all
Right.
these things
Mhm.
because they're not around their mom, that often, except for like certain
Hmm.
like holidays or whatnot. But they're like literally getting ready to go through a panic attack because
Hmm.
of not dealing with those issues, from I guess,
Mhm.
Hmm.
when they were a child or just somewhere along the way. They're just like, I'll just avoid it
Yeah.
until I have to like, deal with it for a little bit and then I'll go back to avoiding it. So it's
Mhm.
Hmm.
wild. Yeah.
I will add this too. So I'm glad you said that. So one of the things that I've observed is, um, as you highlighted, the women on that spectrum, that it's not, what I've found to be most helpful, if you will, is the repair that is made. So, these ways that our parents obviously relate to us, specifically, I was just speaking here about mothers,
Mhm.
Mhm.
that the offense can be made, but what I've noticed is really it's that repair attempt that makes the big difference.
Mhm.
If a mother is willing to acknowledge to her daughter that, hey, yeah, I didn't do too well in this area, that I'm pretty sure I jacked you up because of how I related to you in this fashion.
Mhm.
And oftentimes, especially the clients I deal with, is that there's really not a repair conversation that's had, which is probably the thing that sticks with them most. Is not that
Mhm.
their interaction with their parent obviously wounded them. Is that, man, there was never a repair made. It was almost as if the parent had no remorse about how they showed up. that was
Yeah.
a part of the big significant dynamic of being able to wrestle through, how do I recover? How do I recover, through these issues with my parent when they, one, do not want to acknowledge, or two, don't agree with my interpretation of my experience with them.
Hmm. Yeah, that's such a good point. I think that for the most part, people are pretty, I think they're pretty forgiving, because we yearn for that, like relationship, to have
Hmm.
relationship with people, that what we view as the norm, right? And so we really
Hmm.
want, to be able to forgive. But I, just like what you said, I think that that's the part that is hard, is like, the acknowledgement, because we understand that we're all messing up, on a day-to-day basis. We make
Hmm.
mistakes. But if someone can say, they can own it, then you're able to say, okay, because you want to believe it, even if it's going to be a lie, even
Right.
if the person is going to still, you might, friends like this, even they're going to still be terrible, but
Hmm.
you want to believe it. So it's like, come on, sell me, please, please, please,
Right.
tell me
Right.
anything good, So great point, great point.
I
So
actually wanted to add just a little something to what James said.
yeah.
I think, well, two of the things that I've noticed, a lot of times parents can be very defensive
Mhm.
whenever it comes
That's
to
good.
you pointing out something about their parenting that you disliked. It's
Mhm.
like they take it personally,
Mm.
as
Hmm.
opposed to recognizing you wouldn't even be bringing it up if there
Mhm.
wasn't enough of an attachment there for you to want the repair to occur, number
Please
one.
Right.
say that again. Please say that again.
Yeah, that was
Oh,
good. One
Lord.
more
Now you said that, and I'm like, what did I just say?
time.
But
Yes.
what I was saying is when it comes to parents, sometimes they're too defensive. They
Mhm.
take
Yeah.
whatever their child is saying personally, as opposed to recognizing if the child
Hmm.
is bringing it up, it's because the relationship is there, the attachment is there enough
That is so
that they
good.
would like to repair it. The
Right.
second thing that I've noticed is you guys talked about how there needs to be remorse, but you can't have remorse if the parent doesn't even recognize what they did was wrong. So a
Mm.
Right.
lot of times we parent from our traumas.
Mm.
Right.
That dysfunction becomes normal. So a lot of
Mm.
Hmm.
times parents don't have any idea that what
Right.
they're doing is negatively impacting their kids because that's
Hmm.
how they were parented and that's how their
Hmm.
parents were parented. So a lot of times it
Hmm.
may feel like, I just can't get across to my
Yes.
mom or my dad and they have no remorse. But a lot of times it's also that they honestly, genuinely do not believe they did anything wrong.
I have no idea, right?
So good.
That's a tag in itself. They have no idea. Um and they have no idea. This is crazy. As soon as you said it was like that, they have no idea.
Mhm.
Because they don't have any one language to wrap around what they've experienced. And to your point, because this is what they were handed to them from
Mm.
their parents. And it's become right that dysfunction becomes their normal way of operating in the world. They don't have a basis to compare, like to say, oh, this is healthy, this is not healthy. Like, no, this is the standard, right? What
Mhm.
I'm doing
Mhm.
right now is a standard, and they're as I hear a lot of parents, who have these dynamics. um, I hear parents often say like that they survived their experience with their parents. So
Mm.
what is it that you have to complain about? Like, I survived living with my parents, right? It's like, just because you
Yep.
survived it doesn't mean it's not impacting you.
Right. And
Mhm.
that is so good, because I think
Mhm.
a lot of times, I say our our parents' generation, it was just different. Like,
Mhm.
it was different. Like, I talk to my mom all the time about stuff. I talk to my dad as well. But I'm just like, Mom, like, you guys' generation, I feel like you guys were taught to kind of just accept the abuse, and then just
Hmm.
take it, and not even like if it's physical abuse, because so many times people don't understand that there is, emotional abuse, being manipulated, just being traumatized that way. And it was just just go with it, like it's going to be okay. I still got to get this done and just keep pushing through. And so I think their generation kind of looks at, I'm 37. So they look at our generation, they were just like, okay, y'all get over it. Y'all, this generation, y'all just be falling apart over anything. It's like, no, I think that it's kind of like we have the luxury in a sense to be able to get in touch with our emotions. There's, research. I mean, there's, the internet so that you're able to, look up what does it mean if you're feeling like XYZ, because you have that there. And it's just like you're not being able to deal with it. It's kind of eating away at you. And I think that with us having, exposure to, to the internet and doctors and documentaries and all these different things, we get to say, oh, that's me. I'm feeling like that. Now I know I need to get some help. Whereas our parents' generation, they didn't have that. I mean, it was a different time. And then their parents, it was a totally different time. It didn't matter how they felt, it was just like, you need to go out there and work and pick cotton, do whatever else it is that, they had to do those times. So
you were speaking truth, people in our community don't consider emotional neglect as a form of trauma.
Right.
We don't consider that. We have what I explain
an opportunity to bond with each other, trauma bond.
Right. So I explain to my clients sometimes, like, we are distinctly aware of what I call these big T traumas. So, physical abuse, sexual abuse. But what happens for a lot of people most often is what I call these little T traumas or developmental traumas that happen along the way.
Right.
And so I have, even as I speak with older generations, highlight the parenting differences, I have a lot of empathy for that generation because I realize that for a lot of them, right, it's just not about acknowledging something to their child about how they've impacted them. In order for them to acknowledge something to their child, they first had to admit that to themselves. And when you build your sense of identity around that, you're about to have an identity crisis, because if you have to say to your child, man, I'm sorry for such and such, how I'm talking to you or how I've talked to you. Now you have to own like your own experience of how your parents impacted you.
Right.
And instead of, and that can just produce a lot of shame. And so it's easier just to, like you said, either deny or just put it out of your awareness. And that obviously causes a whole host of issues, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, because it's kind of like I survived this already. I don't want to go back into that, but like I love to ask, like my parents questions, or people, not even my parents, just older, folks that I know, anyone, and just when they share their experience, how it affected them, because to me, like it helps me understand them better, so I'm really receiving the real like who they are, who they are, and they're who they are based off of the things that they experience. And so like when my mom like shares, different things with me, like I ask her about stuff and she shares with me, I'm like, oh, okay. So when I was busy judging you, too busy judging you, like, well, you this and that, you don't get that. I'm like, oh, okay. This is why, like you move the way that you move, and and it really is strength, and so it's just like, but I think that's so important, is to ask your parents questions, and so that you understand them, and then you can understand you better as well, because those are the people who shaped who you are.
I'll say this and I'll leave it like this. I tell my clients, one of the greatest hacks, if you want to find out more about your parents' story, is to ask your aunties and presuming they're there, ask your aunties and your uncles about what it was like. You don't have to point the finger directly and say, hey, what was it like to grow up with my mama or my daddy? But you can ask, what was it like to grow up in your household from your experience?
Right.
And it's amazing what you'll find out, and pieces of information that'll now make sense based off your experience with your primary caregivers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we got carried away with this one. So,
Yes. You just
um,
open it up. You
I
open
know,
it up,
I
V. You
know,
just
I know.
open it up.
So the next question I wanted to go into, what are the signs of having daddy issues? Because it's still important, they are real. We just talk
Mhm.
about them. I think we just kind of default to that, but we don't really go into, well, what does it mean to have daddy issues, and what are those signs of having daddy issues? And actually, to add to that, for mommy issues and daddy issues, how do you get them? You know, so
Yeah. I
Diane,
think it's interesting.
oh
Right. Go
No, go
ahead,
ahead.
Dr.
You
Deanna.
can go ahead, James.
yeah,
So,
doesn't matter where
so it's interesting, man. So I have told you guys I see about 80% of my practice is with African American men.
actually.
And most often for a lot of brothers, they are, and it's not strange, but just sobering to realize like a lot of them can articulate that they have, for the brothers who have wounds from their fathers, they can feel the impact of their wounds, but they can't always give language to how it's impacted them. So, like, they can feel like, man, I feel the absence of my father, but they can really articulate, like, how are these issues showing out in my present day to day
Mm-hmm.
experience?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I think and this is a part, I was going through grad school and had to do a research study on the effects of motherlessness versus fatherlessness. I want to be a caveat. I want everybody to have their mama and their daddy. So I think both should
Yeah.
be present. But when you're looking at the research, the impact of a absentee father is so significantly more than that of an absentee mother,
Right.
as relates to obviously behavior issues in school, um, problems. The most significant, I think, I would say, daddy issue that I see manifested is challenges either with authority, having issues around authority. That's on
Mm-hmm.
one end. So brothers who have like really, really significant problems with authority figures, older authority figures that resemble their fathers. Or
Mm-hmm.
on the other end, I see brothers who are very shy, who are very like a lot of low self-esteem, so
Mm-hmm.
they can't handle really strong, intense figures of men who they connect to um, their fathers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other big thing is they just have a limited emotional vocabulary. Let's say they have really low emotional literacy as it relates to even naming their emotions.
Mm.
Um, they have a significant issue around sometimes even giving and receiving affirmation. I think that's probably one of the biggest things is because a father, belief helps to establish a sense of identity for a child. Not hearing those statements that, hey, I believe in you. I believe your life has meaning and value often leads a man, the other significant issues. So the first one is authority. Other biggest one is men lack a sense of vision and purpose.
Mm.
And so this, circles round to what I often hear from men, like around they're saying they have daddy issues because they don't feel respected by their women. But oftentimes, brothers, please forgive me, the reasons that they don't feel respected or it's hard for a woman to follow a brother sometimes is because they simply lack vision and purpose. So it's
Right.
not that I am wanting to be disrespectful or dishonoring to who you are as a man, but a man sometimes can be intimidated because if they don't have a sense of vision and purpose, a woman's very literally purpose and then walking in that can be an intimidation to a man. And that's a whole other topic for a different day. So I'm going to
Right.
stop there before I go too far.
Yeah, but no, those are great points, because even though you were talking about, your experience with doing therapy with the brothers, I know you
Hmm.
do therapy with women as well, but
Hmm.
it's the same. A lot of those things are the same. They show up the
Hmm.
same way in women, but the only other the thing that I feel like is a little different, the man, he has no, ends up having no vision. That woman, she has a problem with authority, and then she also, but it makes her a little bit more driven, and so she's got the vision,
Right.
she's doing all this, but she's kind of like sacrificing that feminine side. um that's what I, see from it, because she's like
Mm-hmm.
not covered, by not having that
Mm-hmm.
father figure. She's not covered. So she is being a woman, superwoman, which ends up turning into a masculine version of that. Like,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
he has to be a soldier as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, that ends up being, I feel like how it goes a different direction. It's like almost like, I don't know, like extra, like
Right.
she's trying to be both, or she's got to be extra, which it results in her sacrificing her feminine side.
Mhm.
And
I for,
yeah, and then and basically in telling her man, like even raising him, because she's just like,
mm-hmm.
well, yeah, we both ain't got no daddy, I understand, so I'm like helping you with
Mm-hmm.
everything. It's like, no, like men need something different than we need, and
Yeah.
we can't be doing all these different roles, because it
Yeah.
ends up causing illness within us. So,
It
but yeah,
does.
for you.
They end up. So I was going to say the other two is, that men either do one or two things. They mask their father wounds with achievement, which is really significant, especially for a lot of brothers that I talk with, is that they mask their father wounds with achievement. So on the surface, you wouldn't be able to tell that this brother is struggling with father wounds because he's productive. He is, so to speak, he's killing the game in his fear of the industry or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But you would never know because he's masked that father wound with achievement or with womanizing. Um, and yeah, I'll leave it at that
Okay.
before I
Well,
go
thank
too
you so
Also,
far.
much.
I
So, Dr.
wanted to
Diana,
add. Oh,
yeah.
sorry, you
No,
were
it's
saying
okay.
something, V.
Yes. So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't know if something was going on with my audio, but yeah. So I was going to say, Dr. Elia, what's your input on how are these daddy issues showing up in women, from your experience?
When it comes to the daddy issues in women, one of the things I always remind people is if you have a daddy issue, it goes back to your attachment with your dad.
Mm,
Your
Mm-hmm.
dad could have been physically present and
mm,
emotionally absent. You will still have a daddy issue.
right.
So,
Yes.
trauma isn't just what was done to us, trauma is also what should have been done for us but wasn't. So, going
Mm,
back to what
right.
James said
Mm.
earlier, a lot of times if your dad was not meeting those emotional needs, or maybe he abandoned the family altogether, which meant he wasn't meeting your physical or emotional needs, then the way
Mhm,
that can show up in women is in different ways. Whenever you have a wound in childhood, in adulthood, you either try to fix it in
mhm,
your relationships or you avoid it. So if you're the avoidant type, you may avoid intimacy with men
mm,
or you may pursue casual relationships. That
Mm-hmm.
way, if anyone is doing the leaving, it's you as opposed to them leaving you, which is going to re traumatize or re victimize you. And then on the other side of that, you have the women who try to fix the father wounds, even if they don't recognize that's what they're doing. These are the
mhm,
types of women who may be more likely to go for older men. They may be
Mm-hmm.
more clingy or
mhm,
needy or dependent in relationships. They
Mm-hmm.
may also struggle with trust because if you can't
mhm,
trust your father, who's supposed to love, protect, and guide you, it makes it difficult for you to also trust the man that you're dating or that you're
Mm-hmm.
seeing. In addition, you might notice that women with daddy issues struggle in relationships with boundaries, not
mhm.
knowing what is and is not acceptable because they never had that modeled for them. So it's
Right.
like they're kind of winging it, trying to figure it out as they go.
Mm,
And then, unfortunately, the problem with having mommy and daddy issues is when you don't address it, a lot of times you gravitate towards the same type of partner. So,
mhm,
for example, if your dad was not available to you, you may gravitate towards men who also are not available to you. And you don't
Mm-hmm.
understand why that is, but it's
mhm.
because your inner child is trying to fix what was broken in your childhood.
Absolutely.
Mm. Love that.
Absolutely. That is so good because it makes me think of something that, I learned recently, just in picking up all this wisdom from folks. Um, and that is what I've noticed is that Well, actually, I'm going to save it because I have that question for you guys at the end, and so I'll bring it back then because I feel like it's a perfect way to get into that. Um, so, anywho, so in you all's experience, have you found it more difficult? I know we kind of touched on this, but have you found it more difficult for individuals to address their parental issues with one parent over the other? Um, yeah, yeah, to address your parental issues, like your mom issues, your dad issues over the other. Um, the reason I asked that is because I've talked to some, in discussing this topic that it was coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like it's crippling, for women to talk about their mom issues. So it's like, even though they don't like, the daddy issues comments, it's almost like they accept it because it's so, it's this is what comes up. It's the first thing that people, will go to when they're trying to, I guess, insult you in a way. So have you guys found it, either way with men or, women, have you found it easier or more difficult for them to address the issues with the parent that's the same sex as them?
Mm-hmm.
I think it depends on the issues.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
for example, if you're talking about someone with daddy issues and it's related to emotional needs not being met, because of the way that men are socialized, it can be very difficult to have that conversation because a lot of men perceive emotions, feelings that's associated with being weak or being vulnerable. So, in
Mm-hmm.
that sense, it may be difficult for them to really connect with or understand what you're saying,
Mm,
especially if the father thinks, I did what I was supposed to do, put a roof over your head, food on the table,
Mm-hmm.
clothes on your back.
mm,
And then when it comes to talking to a mom, I don't want to generalize because, of course, this can happen in any setting, but a
mm,
lot of times there's so much mommy guilt where
mm,
moms feel like they have to be super mom.
mhm.
When their kid comes and tells them that this is the way in which I feel like you let me down, or you didn't do enough, or you hurt me, they're a lot more defensive. It's
Right.
very difficult. It can be very difficult to have that conversation because they're so busy not wanting to appear like bad mom. It makes
Mm,
it difficult for them to even hear what you're saying because
mm.
any little thing can be perceived as an attack.
Right. That's really
That's
good.
so true.
That's really
That's
good.
so true. I not very much difference. I think the caveats I would add, and you were speaking on this specifically for men, is this dynamic where vulnerability equals weakness for a lot of men.
Mm,
And because they've associated vulnerability with weakness, any sharing of emotion can can be very hard to say the least.
Mhm.
I
And
find
really
that.
quick, that's fun. That's funny because I think that that's just in our community. I think the emotional side, there's some, women who are like,
Mhm.
I don't cry, like they don't cry,
Mhm.
because it's just
Mm,
like black people, have to be so
mhm.
strong all the time. It's like they don't get to cry or have that emotion.
We,
But yeah, continue.
man,
I wanted to add
look, we've inherited. So you think about, man, we've 400 years of slavery. I don't think we're fully through that. A lot of this has
Oh
been
yeah.
inherited, passed down,
Mhm.
and Dr. Dyona knows this. We have this field of study in our profession called epigenetics,
Mhm.
which is where now for it's already been happening, but more research is coming out
Mm.
about how trauma is inherited, how it can be passed down
Oh
from
my
generation to
goodness.
generation,
Mhm.
how
Yeah.
even poverty, right? The mindset of think about this, how the mindset of poverty can be passed down from one generation to the next.
Mhm.
And so when you talk about, like you said, specific to our community, um, I think I see it across all communities, specific, especially with men. I say I see it across all communities, no matter typically what type of man that you are, but I see it more acutely with our brothers because of our history of slavery and a whole bunch of other different factors. I think all of us men experience it,
Mhm.
but I think it's just so much more acute, if you will, in our community because of our history.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That what Black Marvel says, as a man, he doesn't think that we have an issue with vulnerability, but we have an issue with being clowned if we choose to display um, or vocalize our vulnerability. And there's a lot of we have a lot of issues
Mhm.
surrounding that because we have these ideas of what you're supposed to be and what is a man, what is a woman, and the truth is the truth is that we're multifaceted. We're so many things. A woman is so
Mhm.
many things. I just heard something today I was listening to in a room, and it was remarkable because the young man, he actually has been on my show before, Ken Billions. He was talking about those relationships and like this attack, on each other. But he was breaking down how a lot of times men don't see women as human, right? And so he
Mhm.
was just saying how his mind was so blown when he found out his mom was human, found out that she like lived, a life like she liked adventure. She, because they associate that like, oh no, that's what men like. We like adventure, we like action, we like all these different things. And
Mhm.
we're looked at, women are looked at, oh, as this thing to protect, and they're so fragile, and things like that, which a lot of us women, we welcome that, to an extent, but then we don't welcome it when it comes to like making our own decisions and having vision and,
Mhm.
wanting to go after our careers. Then it's just like, wait a minute, I want equality, and so, but
Mhm.
it's just, it's interesting, like how it's seen, and it just made me think about how sometimes I said different things, and some man was like, you like that, you do that, you watch action, action packed movies. I'm like, yeah, like I did. You watch X-Men and Marvel. I'm like, yeah,
Right.
like what do you think, what are you
Mhm.
thinking? Like I can't be
Mhm.
girly and also like these things. I can't vocalize, like my opinion. I can't embrace my sexuality. It's just like, no, you're supposed to be perfect, pure, the purest thing, not say a cuss word, not, and it's just like, what? And it just brings me back to the idea of like you can be raised in the same household with your brothers and your sister and just get a totally different upbringing. Just completely different. It's
Yes,
crazy.
that is so true. I think we are the same parents that raised your siblings are not the same parents that raised you.
Hmm.
Two
Absolutely.
different parents.
Absolutely. It's the
That is true.
truth. So let's see here. Okay, so in y'all's experience, have you found it more difficult to? Well, we already talked about that actually. So how do you get away? How do we get away from that shaming stigma? You had mentioned something about the shaming stigma earlier, but how do we move away from that? Because
Mhm.
basically moving away from the shaming stigma and not like focusing on one over the other, like accepting this but then not that, and then still not really dealing with the issue. Like how do we move away from this shaming stigma so that we can actually address the issue?
I mean, I think it starts with us actually acknowledging our own mommy and daddy issues,
Hmm.
because it's
Mhm.
harder to use something as an insult or a negative word when you know it also applies to you. So when you recognize you have that tendency to throw out mommy daddy issue, sit and ask yourself, is it possible that I have one or both of those? What
Hmm.
was my relationship like with my parents growing up? And I don't
Hmm.
care how perfect, Cosby Show, Leave It to Beaver, or whatever your family may have
Mhm.
been,
Right.
you're going to have, as James said earlier, some wounds from your family of origin. So don't use the label in a negative way or a stigmatizing way, but also reflect on your own mommy and daddy issues and then normalize talking about it so that
Mm-hmm.
people can recognize if you have mommy and daddy issues, doesn't make you a bad person, doesn't mean you're not worthy of being loved or in a relationship. All it
Right.
means
Yes.
is that you have wounds from childhood that still affect you in adulthood, but with that knowledge, you can do something about it, whether it's going to
Right.
therapy, building up your social support network, and so on.
Hmm. I
Absolutely.
love that.
Mm-hmm.
The uh to your point, I think she's absolutely right. That first point, like, leading with transparency. I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is that we just got to lead with transparency
Yeah.
and speak. As I'm always telling when I sit with couples, to start with "I feel" rather than "you." Like, to take ownership of your own experience, right, and to speak from that. Because I find that sometimes it's not so much that we have, right, like these mommy and daddy issues, as much as we weaponize people's vulnerability against them.
Mm-hmm.
And when we weaponize that vulnerability, of course that's going to make somebody want to shut down and withdraw and stonewall and not want to open up and talk. If you feel like your words are being twisted, or they have been used now as Exhibit A,
Mm-hmm.
in a conflict of why why I'm having this issue with you. No, they're gonna be, especially brothers, to Marvel's point. When he was saying they're afraid of being clown, it's like they don't
Mm-hmm.
want their vulnerability weaponized against them. And I think that's
Right.
for both women and men, that we
Mm-hmm.
don't want our vulnerability weaponized against us. And so, speaking from our experience, I think is important.
Right.
What we know, from research, specifically speaking with couples, right, is that only 30% of the couple of issues that we have in relationship, specifically speaking about married couples,
Mm-hmm.
are resolvable. So 30% of the issues that you have with your partner are going to be resolvable. The other 70% are going to be perpetual issues. So
Mm-hmm.
the question is not hey, how can we get rid of these issues? Because I think a part of
Oh,
what
right.
makes people feel so rushed is they feel like, man, we got to really get rid of this issue.
Right.
And it can really diminish their sense of relationship satisfaction if they feel like, this issue keeps popping up. Now, I'm not talking about serial cheating or perpetual cheating. Obviously, that's we put that caveat that I'm not saying, hey, tolerate a cheating spouse perpetually, right? So taking that out the mix. But what I am saying is that, based
Yeah.
off that research, connecting that to the reality that, we are evolving. So there are parts of our experience, wounds that we have from our caregivers, our mother and our father, that will be tapped on at different seasons of a relationship, um, different seasons of our life. I was sharing before with you guys that me and my wife have a 7-year-old son,
Mm-hmm.
and there are certain things I would have considered about my experience with my dad until my son was born. And as he's
Mm-hmm.
getting older, I'm like, oh, okay, this makes sense now. And I'm connecting things, but that's
Mm-hmm.
only as I'm
Interesting.
evolving, as I'm growing. Um, and so the question, to my point, then becomes, well, how do we cope with these issues? How do we not let our wounds from childhood be the
Mm-hmm.
thing that bankrupts this relationship? How do we
Mm.
leverage them for our benefit?
Ugh,
That's it.
that was good. So good. So good. All the gems. I hope you all are soaking all of this in. If not, just go ahead and replay it. Watch it again. Watch it again. Take some notes because oh, it's so good. Such good information. So I want to go into the next question, and I remember because I almost forgot what I said. I was going to wait until the end, but I will mention it. But this is one that I think is very important, and that question is: what is the process to overcome these issues, these mommy issues, these daddy issues, when that parent is uncooperative? James, I think you were mentioning something earlier. You were kind of touching on it. I was like, don't touch on it too much. That's what I was thinking. Don't touch on it too much. But this is important because I think that so many people, they're like in bondage because they don't believe that they can heal from these issues without that parent being cooperative, without that parent saying, yeah, you know what? Let me go to therapy with you, because we already talked about the earlier how some of them, parents feel defensive, and so that's probably not as likely as them saying, yeah, sure, I'm down. Let's go to therapy so you can tell me about how I dropped the ball, or how you think, where I could have improved. That's not happening, right? Not as often as we would like. So how do you overcome that? How do you overcome those issues if your parent is not cooperative and not willing?
That's that's a good question. I think half of the part is one, awareness. What I like to say to my clients, and I say this to anybody, and even I'll sometimes remind myself of this, is that the offense and the wound may be on your parent, but your healing is your responsibility. The wound and the offense may be on your parent, but your healing is your responsibility. And so you got to understand this, that anytime you put your healing outside of yourself, you're going to set yourself up for bondage. If you put your healing on the outside of yourself, you're going to set yourself up for bondage, because one, you can never control people's performance and you can't control their opinions of you, especially your parents. So I think part of the dynamic is, if you can have a conversation, great. If you can share, that's great. And when you share, the goal is not necessarily, and I tell my clients this sometimes, the goal is not necessarily to share for a reconciliation. If that happens, that is great. If it does happen, that is like, man, that's wonderful. That's going to be like some more juice in your bag. But you sharing is more about your own healing journey. It's sharing your experience of how, sharing your experience with how you experience your caregivers. If they're going to reconcile, that's going to be awesome. If they're not going to reconcile, the conversation that needs to be happening is around boundaries. So how do I set boundaries with this parent who is, to your point, Dyona, unwilling, unaware of even what you're saying? So you could be literally spilling your heart out. So they'll be like, what are you talking about? Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Right.
It's like,
for some clients, that even isn't traumatic, and sharing and having a parent say, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I think the issue becomes, how do I set boundaries if the parent is going to continue to either, one, deny that my experience of them was accurate, or they're not changing. So if they're not going to change and they're not going to reconcile, the conversation needs to be had. What are your boundaries going to be to make sure that you maintain your own healing as a result of how you set boundaries with that parent?
It's excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, that was so good. What James said, I feel like you hit every single nail on the head. What I would add is therapy goes a long way towards providing you support if and when you're ready to have that conversation with your parents. And I can remember several times where I had clients who wanted to address or confront their parent. And I would always tell them, I don't recommend having that conversation until you will be okay, even if they do not agree with you. And
Please speak on it.
Apologize and do not reconcile. Like I always say to them, you cannot wait on this other person to do for you what you need to do for you. Because the reality is, sometimes people hurt us, and you can have it caught on video and they will deny.
They be like, it wasn't me. Yeah, I'm Shaggy.
Fabricated. So
Exactly. So going back to what James said,
Mhm.
if
Yeah.
you're waiting on this other person to see the light and all of a sudden recognize how much they screwed you, you put yourself in a position where it's like being in prison and giving them the key. I say,
Mm,
don't
Absolutely.
be in prison. Take the key back, walk out of the door. You can have that conversation. If it
Mhm.
goes well, great. Talk it over with your therapist. If it doesn't
yeah.
go well, talk it over with your therapist and then figure out, how can I navigate this relationship moving forward? What boundaries can I put into place? And then also, a good therapist will help you to role play so that you don't just have to go
Yes.
into it with your parent fresh. You can actually role play with your therapist,
Mm.
figure out, what if they
Mm,
say this? What
so
if they're
good.
hostile? What if they're defensive?
Mhm.
It helps you to practice so that you can have that conversation. Hopefully it goes well, but even if it doesn't, going back to what James said, healing
Mhm.
starts with you.
Absolutely.
So
That's so
awesome.
good. Yeah. So what I wanted to add to that, or what I learned, is that sometimes with those issues, or maybe it's just something that you feel like you didn't learn. I've heard a lot of times from guys that I've talked to, the things like, oh, my dad never had these kind of conversations with me. The way I learned was more so being scolded, what not to do, but none of the like sharing the
Mhm.
stories of how, they came up, and those sorts. And it's same, same, I would say, for me. But one thing that I learned in having, like, those big brothers, or, big play brothers, or men, older men that are in your life, they were able to show me different things and teach me different things that I didn't learn, like from my father. I mean, I was raised by my stepdad. But I didn't get to learn, because I'm sure, his focus was more so on my brother and teaching my brother different things, being a man, and, all that stuff.
Mhm.
But there's things that we miss a lot of times. So to your point earlier, when you said your father, can be present and still like not really be present in all those
Mhm.
ways that, you need, so that you can go out into the world and have, many tools, not just, a couple. And so what I learned is that those friends that were in my life, those men that God put in my life, they were able to kind of, I guess you could say, heal some of that, without it coming from my
Mhm.
dad. And I think people don't realize it, to go back to the point of, when you have an uncooperative parent, and that's not the case there. But I just so happen to be able to get that, healing without even knowing it, So a lot of times
Mm,
that healing can come from someone who is not
Mhm.
your parent. And that's
yeah.
something I think that we need to realize,
Right.
that so we're not stuck on our growth, journey. We're
Mhm.
not like, well, can't do nothing. My parents, they won't hear me out. So I'm just gonna be hurt and traumatized forever. And it's
Mhm.
just like, well, no. And so I wanted to bring that up
Right.
to, hear your all's perspective on that, is, can you be, healed, you get that healing from
Mhm.
someone who's not
Mhm.
your parent.
Absolutely, man. I think this is, and this is where I speak on my faith. I think that's the beauty of um, my experience as a believer, as a
Mhm.
person of faith, and believing that God has a way of redeeming our stories, of planting
Mhm.
people in our path to help make up for what we did not get from our biological parents.
Mhm.
And my even to speak from my own experience, I have a uncle that is currently incarcerated, has been incarcerated for the last 20 years,
Mhm.
and recently connected with him.
Mhm.
um, Found out that he's doing an associate's degree in counseling.
Hmm.
I send him books. We talk
Oh,
about books around therapy, and it's been so healing to be able to connect in him in ways that
yeah.
historically, and I share this experience that I haven't been able to do with my father.
Mm.
Right. So, still connected. Lord is planting him in my life, but he's feeling a void, and we're having this type of connection, talking about different
Right.
aspects of even his experience growing up in his household. So look, I'm finding so much about my dad through my uncle,
Mm.
getting the skinny, as they say, and filling in the gap. So I do think that God specifically plants people in our path, even sometimes for a lot of people, unbeknownst to you, you don't even know that that person has been planted, I believe, divinely, providentially to meet a need in your life until sometimes it's later down the road and you're reflecting and you're thinking about, man, this person has played a pivotal role in my life. So to your question, yes,
Yeah,
I think it can be
absolutely.
redeemed.
Yeah, it's like you're gonna be all right. That's the beauty, of it. You might have mommy, daddy issues, but you're gonna be all right. Doctor
Absolutely.
Diana?
I mean, I think that James said most of what I would have said. I think social support is huge. And I remember when I was doing research for this topic, one of the things they said is if you want to get over mommy and daddy issues, research has shown that there are three things that will help you to do that: therapy, social support, so having people in your life who have your back, who you can go to, who meet your needs, and then the third one was anger, where you can recognize that what was done to you was wrong. So you're not
Yeah.
minimizing it, you're not rationalizing it, you're not justifying it. So I think that going back to what James said, my background is I'm a believer. And I also feel like sometimes God puts people in your life and you don't even recognize it. And
Don't
Right.
then they
recognize.
That's
say or
right.
do things, or you look back and recognize, oh my God, that person was there for a reason. So honestly, gratitude is also a part of healing, where
It
rather
is.
than focusing on what was not done for you or what was done to you, you focus on those people who have provided a corrective healing experience.
Yes.
Absolutely. That was so good. So
So good.
good. Way to end the show. I mean, yeah, as you guys are saying that I didn't even know, that those two individuals were feeling that, void or doing that for me. I'm like, oh, like I'm so grateful, like I get it. Like God, that's why, that's why you're here. It's because, and we do that for each other, because one of my
Yeah.
friends who does that for me, he lost his parents at, a young age, like 17. And so it's kind
Wow.
of like, even though I'm not his mom, I'm very nurturing and maternal, and I, support him and, big him up, when he needs to be and, give him that wisdom from, the feminine, side. And so
Mhm.
it's just a beautiful thing, relationships as we grow and become more healthy and how we are able to help heal each other, And so just love that. It's amazing.
Yes.
Um, so well, that is all the questions that I have, and we're wrapping it up. We went a little over an hour, and I want to go ahead and give you guys a moment to tell the people where they can find you, and if you have anything coming up that you would like to share, please feel free to share it. James.
Yep. Just visit me at jamesperkins.health. If you want to connect with me in some way, jamesperkins.health is the best place to do that. Or Instagram, James Perkins Inspires.
As for myself, I actually blog in my spare time at drdiona.com. My
Love it.
private practice website is augustinspsychology.com. And you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at Dr. Dyona. That's DRDYONA. And then I also have a YouTube page that I share with my sister, Dr. Joe. It's the Mental Health
Love it.
Sisters at YouTube.
I
So
love it.
awesome. So good. So good. Well, again, I just want to thank you both for coming on and for returning. Dr. Diana, she'll be back with us a couple of times this season. So I'm excited about those shows as well. But thank you so much. And like I say to you guys all the time, any platform I have, I definitely will think of you. So happy to have you. I love what you guys are both doing for the community and just for people. And so just keep doing what you do. I love you all. And to the audience, thank you so much for watching. We will be back in 2 weeks. What is that? Can't think of the date right now, but we'll be back in 2 weeks for our second episode. And that will be, get ready, dating with desperation. Do not compromise your purpose for a partner. So that's
a big one.
We
Y'all
get
have fun.
into it this season. Thank you so much, Daryl, for putting the date. Yes, the 20th, November the 20th. We'll be back for that episode. So we will see you then. And till then, good night.
Good night.
Good night,
Take care.
everyone.